the role of the trainer. This is probably, to me, one of the most critical parts of using the NeurOptimal process. And this is probably from my perspective as a neuropsychologist, is for me, I was always trained to understand that the schooling that I had left me more prepared to help somebody else than they were to help themselves. And the NeurOptimal philosophy is quite the opposite. There is no schooling that we have that is better than the knowledge the individual has already. And that is a very, very significant perspective change, and one that is easy to forget because, you know, everything that you've done for the last whatever many years has been you're always helping somebody else. You're not responsible for somebody else, nor are you responsible for their journey and how they make it through this process. What you are responsible for is providing the service. But beyond that, everything else we are empowering the client to take credit for. No matter what is happening, it is the way they are responding. It's their journey, and it's not ours. We have no way of changing protocols. We have no way of doing something different. The best we can do is to go through and help them figure out what is working and what isn't working. So whether it is how often do you want to come in, you know, how long would you like to, how many sessions do you want to do? All of this is entirely up to the client. Now, I can hear every voice scream out to me, how do they know? They've never done this. They don't know what's going on. They're damaged. They're whatever. You know, the deal is that we have a very, very intuitive part to our brain. And when we are under stress, and when we are nervous or anxious or depressed or any and all of these other symptoms that arise in our world and life, we are not able to pay attention to our inner self. And the philosophy of Zengar is one, of course, do no harm, and that I think that makes a lot of sense. But the other is to empower the individual to feel that internal feeling again. And if what they are relying on is us telling them how they did or what they're doing or whether they're making progress or how many sessions to come in or any of that, when they require us telling them that, then it automatically turns it into a medical model of us knowing more than they know. Now, granted, you've taken this course. Hopefully you'll take the advanced course, so you'll have more knowledge about how this system works, but we don't have anything that shows us what's going on in that person's brain. Everything else is an assumption. We think this is what's going on, maybe, but we don't know that. And no matter how much we know about the brain, we still don't know that because we're not in there. We don't see it happening. We don't feel what they're feeling. And so the only thing we can do is empower them to feel that and talk to you about it. Now, the easiest way to do that is to train yourself. Start with what you're telling them to do. It is so difficult for people to go through a process, ask you how you're doing, and you either have to lie about it or you have to say, I don't know, I don't do this. You know, that doesn't in any way instill any trust that this is a program or a process that they're going to gain benefit from. You know, because we're not a medical treatment or anything like this, you know, the people that you're working with, you can get as close to them as you want to get, which is also a very interesting thing. You know, I've become very close friends with a lot of the people that I've trained that have been in my offices because there is not a hierarchy. There is not the feeling of, you know, you're my client, I'm your therapist, or I'm your trainer, I'm your whatever. That hierarchy is not part of what the NeurOptimal process is about, because it's a training program. You know, the only difference is that you own the machine and they do not. They could. So you want to be in a position, if they decide they do want to, that they'll buy that system through you. You'll make a little bit of a commission on it, and it then kind of pays you for the idea that they're no longer your client. You know, you can still help them get started and help them through everything, but you know, you're not making the money session-wise that you would have before. We'll talk a little bit more about that part when we get into more of the business aspect. So you always want to walk the talk. You never want to do something or ask somebody else to do something that you're not doing or that you haven't already done. And again, like I told you, I've done so many hundreds of sessions. I have no idea how many sessions I've done. I couldn't even venture a guess over the last 25 years. So part of what your job as the trainer is to make sure that they understand this process in a way that they don't keep coming back to you saying, but how am I doing? What do you think? What's my brain look like? How is it doing now? Did it make any progress this time? All of those things are turning it into a medical model. So when you explain in the very beginning how all of the change is going to be inevitable, whether or not they're hooked up to a session and they're with you or not, they're going to go through change. And they're going to keep moving whether they take the NeurOptimal sessions or not. The nice thing about taking the NeurOptimal sessions, and you can explain this to them, is that flexibility and resilience means that no matter what is going on environmentally, externally, internally, you're going to be able to jump through those hoops a lot faster. You're going to be more flexible, and you're going to be able to change in a way, you know, change in a way that makes your world and life less uncomfortable. So really helping them understand what this process is about is the most prime job that you have. I personally call any of our wellness trainers detectives. You're always looking for very minute changes or shifts in what they are presenting to you as when they come into their office. So keeping good notes is really important, making sure that you work with them on releasing any expectations. You know, I always ask, you know, when they first come in, and we're going to go through this new consultation for new clients here in just a few minutes, but I always ask, you know, what is it that you're expecting to get from doing this process? What do you know about it up to this point? What, you know, or after I've already explained everything, what do you feel like it could help you with? When they say, boy, you know, I just would love for all these migraines to go away. Now you have an expectation, they have an expectation that this is going to fix their migraines. And you are in a position then where you can say, you know, we really don't know exactly what fun things you're going to experience as you go through this. And we have in the US, I don't know if you guys have it everywhere that you live, but we have something called Cracker Jacks. And Cracker Jacks box always, it was caramel popcorn with peanuts in it. Really delicious and really nasty for you. But always down in the bottom of a Cracker Jacks box was a surprise. Maybe it was an iron-on thing or a tattoo or a ring or a, you know, you just never knew what it was going to be. And that's kind of like this process. You know, you might come into me saying, you know, I want to be able to sleep better. And what we might find along the way is you're no longer grinding your teeth. You're, you know, you're sleeping, you know, you're waking up feeling really refreshed, even though you don't notice that you're not grinding your teeth. I mean, that you're not sleeping. You know, you may just lots of little things happen that may or may not be the one big thing that you think is going to happen. because there's so many subtle little bitty things that have to happen for you to get to the point where you're sleeping better. And so being a detective is really our job, trying to release people from all of those expectations, but looking for the most subtle changes that are occurring. You know, when you first came into me, you had your shoulders up, you were clenching your jaw, you were, you know, talking really fast and you know, really passionate. And now here you are sitting with your shoulders down, your tongue must be down in the, you know, from the roof of your mouth. I can, you know, you're talking slower, you just seem more relaxed. All of those things will be in your notes. Now, another thing to do that Mark and I used to do that I was really kind of fun and very noticeable to people was when they came in for that new client consultation, I would just ask them if they would mind if I recorded them telling me their story. Whatever it is that they came to me for, would you mind if I just record you real quick? Now, they're going to ask why, and you're going to say, we'll just use it later. We'll look back. If you decide to do this process, we'll look back on it, and we'll be able to compare that to what you are much later. If you decide you don't want to do this process, don't worry about it. I will, you know, erase all of the video and so forth. And you can even have a little release form if you want. And that is an awesome way for them to see what they looked like. They don't recognize themselves later. They don't, but they recognize all the change they've made. Boy, I didn't know that I was talking that fast. I didn't know that, you know, I looked that, you know, I'm really squinting my eyes. I had no idea I was doing that. And then, you know, 10 sessions later or so, you record another one and show them their very first one. And you do that every 10, 20 sessions. And oh my gosh, the changes that they see are phenomenal at that point. So, you know, educate your clients, make sure that they know this process well enough to know that you are not working as a therapist when you do this process with them. Now, you may be their therapist. And that's why I say you may have to just literally say, I'm wearing my therapy hat, I'm wearing my trainer hat. And just really seriously, I know you have a code of conduct that you have to have as a therapist, and you can use that code of conduct in both cases. But when you're talking about NeurOptimal, it is vitally important that you are a trainer and not a therapist for a lot of reasons. But, you know, if the FDA were to ever see that you're marketing yourself with any kind of a medical twist with that product, we're as a corporation, Zengar as a corporation, will have to say that is not how we teach our clients. That is not, you know, our job is not medical, and we would have to support our FDA regulations of being a trainer only. Answering their questions is, you know, the more information you have, the easier it is for you to answer those questions. We're going to show you how to empower yourself to get to know this system even better in just a little bit. Again, monitoring their shifts, doing that through our progress tracking tools is one of the easiest ways, but you can always do it like in the video. You can come up with your own ways of monitoring changes and shifts, and that's not an issue or problem. And then the big thing is to be okay if a client doesn't feel the change. You know, sometimes it takes a long time for other people to feel it. Sometimes it's the spouse, sometimes it's the parent, sometimes it's whoever will notice changes before the client notices changes. And that's one of the reasons why the better notes we can keep, the easier it will be if they ever come up and say, you know, I feel like I've been doing this for a while and I don't feel any changes. Then we can always go back and say, oh, wow, really? Because it looks like now you're sleeping most of the night. You told me that you even decreased your medications a little bit. And you go through this whole thing, you're able to look at those notes and write, be able to share those with them in a way that they're able to see their progress. Now, Sue Brown, she says, it's not your responsibility to fix the client. It's your responsibility to provide the process only. And remember, because we're putting nothing in, we're taking nothing out, it would be like teaching somebody to read and then not being responsible for what they read. So you can teach them this process, you can teach them to read, but you are not responsible for what it is they do with their training. And why I say it in that way is that occasionally people's journeys as they go through this process is not always the most pleasant. Sometimes people will kind of fight the change that is occurring and will actually deliberately, unintentionally of course, go back and try to respond the same way they were before they ever did this process. Now they learn right away that they don't have to respond that way anymore, that is not serving them well, and so they stop doing it again immediately. But it's like they might take a little bit of a zigzag, a little, off the beaten track to get back onto a journey that is comfortable for them. So again, it's a little bit like if I use my sitting in my chair analogy. I'm sitting in my chair, I'm starting to feel a little uncomfortable, and so I decide to move out of that position, but I think, boy, that doesn't feel like a good position, so I go right back to the position I felt a little uncomfortable in, thinking it won't be uncomfortable now. And yet it is uncomfortable. And it doesn't, I've been in that position too long. And so then I immediately change again and go into a different position. And that is kind of sometimes what happens with other people as they go through this journey, is they go right back to what they were doing and it doesn't work for them and they immediately change and do something different. Now, by me telling you that, I just created an expectation for you. Now I want you to release it. I want you to know that not everybody does that. Not everybody will do that. The majority of the people we worked with never went back in any way. They continually felt better and better and better and better. And that is mostly what happens in their journey. But any and all of our thoughts and our expectations and our experience bleeds over into our relationship with our clients. And those clients then will pick that up. So here's one that happens quite a bit, is that most therapists have been trained to think that you do a session with your client, then you need an amount of time, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever, to simulate that information before you do another session. That is not the case with NeurOptimal. You can do a session every single day. You could do 2 sessions every single day. You are constantly training a different brain every time it's on. So we don't need or want to tell them how much time they need for their brain to understand this in between. And yet your education would tell you that that's not the case. So with this training program, it really is okay. Now, on top of that, with this training program, and because we are all detectives, and because this is important to empower them, we're always asking them, how are you feeling today? Do you feel like you'd like to do another session? When would you like to do that session? I have time available here, whenever those things are. And so together you can work it through dependent upon your own personal schedule, or if it looks like they want to be seen daily and you can't see people daily, that just doesn't fit into your program the way it is, then maybe what makes sense is for us to help you understand how rentals could work for you. And they can take that system home, they can do it daily, and then they see you every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however often you'd like to see them, to kind of work through all of the other things that you're working with them through. So as a trainer, our biggest job, besides educating everyone to understand that we are trainers, and this is our job as a detective to work you through all that. The other thing is that just like the central nervous system is monitoring the body in terms of duration, intensity, frequency, and shift, NeurOptimal is also monitoring that in these same ways: duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. And so will we. So when someone comes in and they are concerned with sleep, one of the first things I say is, what is it about sleep that is a problem for you? And you keep working it down to its simplest form. Are you having problems falling asleep? Are you having problems staying asleep? Are you having problems, waking up and talking in your sleep, walking in your sleep, urinating in your sleep, whatever it is, what is going on specifically? Are you getting 5 hours and you'd much rather get 7 hours? Or, what are we actually measuring here? And then once you get all the way down to that very simplest form, then you can recognize, okay. So the problem is that when you wake up, you're not feeling refreshed. Let's talk about that. What is your morning routine? How is it that you're waking up in the morning? And get it down to its simplest form. And then that's what you're going to measure: duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. Are you still waking up feeling less than refreshed every morning? And this is after a few sessions. Is that feeling still so strong for you? How often are you waking up feeling less than refreshed? And is that starting to change at all? Is there any shift in what you felt like from the beginning? And that is really seriously the simplest way. When they come in to talk to you, they're going to talk to you about what it is that's going on in their life and how it's affecting them in their life. When you talk back with them, meet them, join them, that's got to be horribly difficult for you. Now let's go back and talk about how this system works. What you're actually experiencing, this system cannot address in that way. It is able to help you become more flexible and move you away from that discomfort. And when that happens, almost all your symptoms are going to be different. And so we're going to monitor all of those symptoms in terms of duration, intensity, frequency, and shift, but we're not going to talk about that NeurOptimal is making this symptom or that symptom go away. It's the way their body is responding to those symptoms now that are changing.
Hi, my name is Samantha Diabatis. I am the Director of Operations here at Zengar Institute, and I am also a trainer. The biggest lesson that I've learned over the years that I would like to share with you is, because the expertise is built into NeurOptimal and there's really no decision making on our part that needs to be done on behalf of the client, I have found that my role as a trainer really is to help clients be able to recognize their shifts. And the better that I have become at doing that over the years, the happier my clients have become. So the way that I do that is by using the progress tracking tools. I ask a lot of questions, I get a lot of examples, and during that process, there's also dialogue going on between myself and the client, and so I'm able to sort of give some framework to the client in terms of what types of shifts, and not that I'm predicting what shifts will happen because that's impossible to do, but just give them some example of shifts that that have been reported to me by other clients that perhaps have been going through similar circumstances as them. So I find that having that dialogue with the client not only helps you gather information about where their starting point is, but it also really helps set the tone with them in terms of helping them understand really more about the process and more about how NeurOptimal works. And so the better they can understand that, I find the better capable they are of recognizing shifts that are happening in their lives. So I'd like to welcome you to the community. We are humbled to have you on. The more people that use NeurOptimal, the more people that get to receive NeurOptimal sessions who may really, really need them.
So we've talked about progress tracking tools. We're going to really kind of get into those a little bit more just so that you know how to use them. They are not the only way to track progress. Like I said, you could do the little videotapes, which I found to be incredibly effective. You could use measurements that are outside of NeurOptimal altogether. You could use, like I did at times, standardized tests. So you could do something like that if you felt you needed to or wanted to. You know, there's a variety of different ways of watching and looking and observing. The biggest thing is that we want people to feel a difference. And to teach them to feel the difference, they need to really focus on internally what is changing. Now, it's a slippery slope because we don't want them to focus on their symptom per se. We want them to focus on the shifts, the changes. You know, are you chewing more on the right side than the left side? What, you know, are you going out for groceries more? Are you going to dinner more than you go for groceries? Do you, you know, going out for, you know, in public more? Are you, you know, all of these little things, which honestly, at this point, the idea that you are a therapist is probably more beneficial. This is really a lot of what most of us do and did as therapists, is to be a detective. It's just that now it's got to be practically all we do. And it really does make a big, big difference. The better you are at it, the happier your clients are. And that, from what Sam said, is 100% accurate. I see it over and over and over again. The more that the trainers are able to help their clients see those little bitty subtle things that are going on, that are changing, the more they're able to really understand that this process is working for them. So what is a shift? It's the flutter right before a change occurs. It is the flutter in the EEG, but it's also just somebody feels as though this is different. There's something else happening. I'm not, you know, when I wake up, I don't feel quite so tired now. Or, you know, there's just little things that are going to go on. You know, my child seems happier. I don't know why. Or they're trying to talk a little bit more than they did before. Or, you know, all these different little bitty things. You know, she's not hitting me as an autistic child would. You know, things that are just can be enormous things. You know, I'll never forget one client that I had that was severely autistic, and they lived out in Washington, D.C., and at that time we lived in Indiana. And so they came and stayed for a couple of weeks while we went through training and then set them up with a system and all of that. This child was a 9-year-old and a very big 9-year-old girl. And I mean, she had weight behind her. And her mom wasn't a small woman, and yet this little girl attacked her mom just attacked her on a regular basis. I mean, this mama had bite marks and bruises and, you know, kick marks and, you know, scratches, and I mean, just on a regular basis. And mom understood how she had to hold her down to let her get through this fit that she would throw. And she also was a little girl that would only eat plain cooked spaghetti and Lay's potato chips, not with ridges. So those were the symptoms that we were monitoring. That's what we were really looking at. That was, for them, a really, really, really big thing. So we ended up doing these sessions. In the first 2 days or 3 days that we were there, this little girl had stopped having that kind of a fit. She didn't kick her mom. She would do that with her mom probably, you know, 12 to 15 times a day. And within a few days, she was no longer doing it at all. So we saw this very, very, very big change within a week. And we were doing 3 sessions a day for these 2 weeks. within a week, this little girl was starting to talk. She was 100% nonverbal. She didn't even have utterances. And yet she was starting to use a little bit of sign language and was uttering more for more, and was just starting to engage in a way that she never ever had. By the time she left us, she was still eating her plain spaghetti, but she allowed a little oil on it. And more than that, a little olive oil, but more than that, those potato chips, she allowed Ruffles potato chips with ridges instead, and was starting to pick up a few vegetables. She still was hypersensitive to texture, but was so much better. It was incredible. By the time she got home, things that had changed, we were not monitoring in any way, was she stopped having any kind of an accident at night. What's more, she started sleeping through the night, and they used to have to lock her in her bedroom because otherwise she would go down in the middle of the night and either get into the knives, or she'd start the stove and, you know, try to start a fire or something like that. So they didn't even have to lock her door anymore because she was sleeping all night long. You know, the big holes in the walls and things like that, they were able to mend, and they didn't have to do anything about it. Those were the other things that, although not really subtle, they were changes and shifts that none of us expected. They were the prize inside the Cracker Jacks box. None of us had any idea that that would be going on, and it was really, really, really fun and exciting.